From being depicted as a villainous predator to being classified as vulnerable to extinction, here is what is coming up in the Conservationists Assemble. In this episode, you'll hear about the quirks of Madagascar's largest terrestrial carnivore, their threats and the efforts for their survival. Listen in as we hear the stories of our guest expert in his experiences working with the Fossa. And learn how sustainable tourism can provide value to local communities, support for threatened species, and a bit of conservation optimism for the future of our planet. Welcome to the Conservationists Assemble, the podcast that seeks to unite with Earth's mightiest conservation heroes, raising the profile of our planet's threatened species, and putting the spotlight on the fantastic in situ and ex situ conservation efforts taking place around the world in line with the one plan approach to conservation. Highlighting the link between these efforts, as well as asking those important questions of what more can and needs to be done. Whether you're experienced in species survival or new to animal advocacy, this is the podcast for you. Will you join the fight? I am your host, Johnny Bloxham, and I'm inviting you to join the ranks of the Conservationists Assemble community as we take the fight to extinction. This episode is about the Fossa, and today I am teaming up with Johannes Fleiderer, Senior Curator at Leipzig Zoo and Coordinator for the European ex situ Fossa population. Before we start, I just have a brief side note. We are just one episode away from episode 50, and I'm so grateful for everyone who has listened and supported the podcast so far. I am also incredibly excited to see what the next 50 looks like, and where this journey will take us. If you're excited to come on that journey too, I would really appreciate some feedback and your thoughts on the podcast so far. Perhaps you can send me an email while you're listening to this episode. I would love to hear what your favourite episode or who your favourite guest was and why. What you think the podcast and your host, me, is doing well, and what you think it or I can be doing better. How many episodes have you listened to, and how many have you finished? Are the episodes too long, too short, just right, or all too similar despite having different focal species? I really am trying to keep working on myself and the podcast to keep bringing you the best content. So if you feel inclined to share your thoughts, please be honest in your feedback. If you think the show can be improved, let me know. I won't be mad. You can email me at conservationistsassemble@outlook.com or message on the podcast's Instagram or Facebook page, all of which are listed in the show notes. With that being said, if you are still listening and my plea hasn't made you drop off, great, we've got an awesome episode ahead. Johannes, welcome to the Conservationists Assemble. Thank you for joining me. How are you today?
I'm very fine. How are you?
Yeah, really good. And I'm finally glad we've made the time to be able to commit both our schedules to this conversation. It's about quite a unique species, one that probably most people are a little bit aware of, and that is the Fossa. So could you please kick off the episode by just telling us a little bit about the Fossa, please?
Yeah, I think most people knowing them might know them from the movie Madagascar, where they were the bad guys. Actually they are the top predators in Madagascar, at least terrestrial. I mean, there's also crocodiles there, which would be like superior, but Fossas don't like water, so usually they will not encounter them. And it's the largest extant member of the family of the Malagasy carnivores. It's quite special because this carnivore family is quite a recent discovery. In total, there are 11 members, and some look like a mongoose. And originally they were considered to be mongooses, and the Fossa was considered to be a viverrid, so a civet relative. But with some genetic studies, it was found out about 20 years ago that it's just a radiation with a common ancestor, and they look very different. And the Fossa is really unique. You can see a picture behind me, how they look like. And actually, there's an old German name for them, hardly used nowadays. It's called Frettkatze, so ferret cat. And I think this describes it very well, because the body and the tail looks quite cat-like, like a mid-sized cat, a bit smaller than a lynx. but you can see that the extremities are quite short.
Mm.
And therefore I think this name is quite suitable, even though everybody says Fossa today or Fusa, like the Malagasy people would say. Yeah, but I think that describes it quite well. And the species is a very agile hunter. I mean, I've seen them both in captivity and the wild, and it's preying on all kind of species, mainly lemurs, because they are in most parts of the country the largest available prey. But they will also take smaller species, birds, reptiles, whatever they will find. It also a bit depends on the seasons, because in most parts of Madagascar there's a strong difference between the dry season and the wet season. And they are still quite recent species in zoological collections. They've only been kept constantly in captivity since the mid 1960s, and not even on one continent. There was some in America in the mid 60s to 70s in Europe. The constant keeping of them, even though there had been animals already in the 19th century over here, started in the early 70s. The first breeding was in 1974 in Montpellier Zoo in France. And then Duisburg Zoo in Germany, where I used to work before, acquired them also in the mid 70s and bred them since the 1980s. And it's up to this date the most successful breeder of the species, with far more than 60 successfully reared. And so a big part of the global population in captivity goes back to this place.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you mentioned Duisburg because I saw that the EEP was previously associated with Duisburg, and so did you bring the EEP with you to your position here at Leipzig?
Exactly, yeah. I took it over there when the previous coordinator left for a new position 9 years ago. So in early 2016, and then I took it with me to Leipzig. Uh, I had vice coordinators at Duisburg before, but they also moved over to new positions. I mean, Duisburg is still strongly affiliated with the program. They are still the most successful breeders, and they have a large specialized breeding unit, which I know quite well from my time there. So I think it's quite unlikely that any other zoo will ever surpass them in their significance uh, for the captive management, both regarding facilities and also their experience. The head keeper there, Mike Kirschner, with whom I'm still in good contact, he's probably one of the most, if not the most, experienced animal keeper regarding fossa mating. And so even I'm now working in another position, I obviously want to incorporate the knowledge in Duisburg for the sake of the further management of the captive population.
Yeah, and I suppose that's a very good point to make note of is that even though each EEP has its coordinator, you've mentioned obviously vice coordinators, but there are a whole host of people that go into to EEPs and their running. So what are perhaps some of the lesser known roles of an EEP that might take place? Because when we think about them, we purely think about kind of maintaining the genetics and the populations throughout the continent. So what are perhaps some of the lesser known roles of an EEP?
Yeah, actually, EEPs are no longer only breeding programs or population management programs, uh, but following the born plan approach, they are also considered to be like an overarching structure for all activities regarding conservation of a species, and also further roles, like, for example, research, which can be in some cases quite significant if there are still things that have to be addressed or investigated in a particular species. But obviously, with the fossa, they're beyond the population management. There's the role of conservation education. I mean, it's a very significant species as an ambassador for its threatened home, Madagascar. Along with other species kept in our collections, like lemurs, for example. Um, there's also the role of fundraising, There has been some support of in situ projects in Madagascar. I was glad to visit one of the sites in a visit late 2023, a reforestation project, and I could also see a patrol vehicle which was partially sponsored by zoos contributing to the in situ conservation of the species, and obviously also um, research. So one of the examples we had that was that GPS collars, which were used for the monitoring of the of wild fossas in an area in the southwest of Madagascar, they could be calibrated at a French zoo, because obviously you have easier access to fossas in human care, and therefore those researchers could test and calibrate their collars before applying into wild individuals. So in this respect, the captive individuals could directly help that the research going on with their wild conspecifics was in the end more efficient.
Yeah, I think that's really great that zoos are utilizing the species that they house as good good examples or good testing populations for what these efforts in the wild might be. And I'm sure the visitors actually find that kind of knowledge or use of these animals quite inspiring and quite exciting at times.
Yeah, definitely. So I was just not long ago again in contact with Duisburg because they just rebuilt parts of their Fossa complex and built a new Fossa house because it was already in my time that we had the idea to create a larger indoor house because like in cold November days, spring November days, the animals were not that visible because there was no visible indoor housing, and now they created such a house in an area which became available in the meantime due to some other construction works in a nearby area. And they also created a quite nice information panel, and yeah, I also provided a little statement from the EP coordinator's perspective, and the information panels there are addressing also all these different aspects of fossa population management, but also conservation and how zoos can play a role in there.
Oh, that's fantastic. And yeah, certainly one of the best tools that zoos have is the signage that they provide. And just going back to you talked about your colleagues at Duisberg and how in particular some of them are probably the most knowledgeable on fossa breeding ecology. They actually in the wild have quite a complex breeding ecology, if I'm correct, because females can be observed mating with multiple males multiple times over a really extended period of time. Is there perhaps, obviously that's not how zoos typically house species in breeding programs, but is there any kind of way that we're seeing that replicated in zoo fossa population, or is it perhaps a detriment if we to their breeding ecology if we were to try and mimic that in zoos?
Well, those mating trees, which you're referring to, they were described quite late. Actually, the PhD student publishing on that, she was also back then supported by the Fossa Fund of Duisburg, so which is maintained by contributions of the holders. And obviously it's quite hard to simulate that in an environment in human care. Firstly, there's not many zoos keeping multiple males. So Duisburg is one of the few because of this big complex of 10 exhibits. But even then, in an environment in human care, obviously, even if you had very big enclosures, there would still be the risk that you would have to intervene quite quickly if you would simulate this competition. So therefore, it cannot be fully replicated. The advantage that we had in Duisburg, and which they still have at this point in a bit, I mean, there's now kind of a generations change happening there, is that if mating with a particular male was not successful, you could try with another one. Obviously, always considering the genetics. And this is obviously not possible in a zoo keeping only a pair. And obviously, if you're keeping a foster pair, you need a full set of 2 indoor-outdoor enclosures because they're strictly solitary out of the breeding season. And you also have to make sure that they are really properly separated, because there have been cases in the past of, if there were some weak spots of the exhibits, there can be quite bad injuries up to the death of another individual. So that's something which is really essential if you're keeping a pair. There are cases when at some point the animals have to be rotated to another zoo, and there's examples that a male which didn't work out at the first place. Even there's one we had in Duisburg from a UK collection from Port Limp. It was quite important to get him for genetic point of view, but he never bred at Duisburg, and then he was moved over to Frankfurt, and there we bred with a female there, even though there was only one choice there. So in the end, it's also up to the coordinator to make sure that if a certain pairing, which is especially with important animals, doesn't work out, that at some point you will try another combination. And the most significant issue is also that whereas keeping fossas, I mean, just keeping them live and healthy, of course, you also have to make sure to do enrichment to keep them active, but in general, they're quite hardy animals. So there's a few weak spots, so they tend to take in foreign bodies. Unfortunately, there have been some losses because people were throwing something into the exhibit and the animals were swallowing it. But apart from that, it's quite an easy species, but the mating behavior is quite special. It is quite rough. And this is something which, in my opinion, led to the fact that only about a third of the zoos that had kept the species have actually bred them. Because that's something you should see, or you have to inform yourself quite well. And one good example is, for example, Paris Zoo. They had the species quite long and never bred them. And then once they sent a keeper to us in Duisburg, she could spend some time with Mike. And the year after, they bred them, and they've now already bred them with 3 different combinations. And therefore, I'm quite happy that almost every year since I took over the Fossa EP, a zoo that hadn't bred them before bred them. So we are kind of dispersing this knowledge how to breed them, because in the past breeding was quite limited for a long time to a few places. So, for example, in the first 15 years of fossa breeding, only 4 zoos globally managed to breed them, which was Montpellier, Duisburg, Basel in Switzerland, and in '89 the fourth one in San Diego. So it was quite restricted, and obviously, if something is relying to too few places, it's quite susceptible. And so I'm quite keen on enabling more people and spreading the knowledge, because if you want to keep the population viable long term, you should not be relying on a few breeders only.
Yeah, some really great points there, and it's very humbling or very positive to see that international exchange of information, whereby you're or Duisburg are inviting other fossa keepers to exchange knowledge there, and also actually now that international collaboration. But if I'm right, we're starting to or a male from San Diego joined the European population. So in what aspect do we might see that happening more often?
Well, there's quite a good history of exchanges between the American SSP and the EP. Actually, the SSP is kind of a spin-off of the EP. Initially, the North American population was quite small. The population was founded also initially by animals from Europe, from Switzerland back then, at San Diego, and later on there have been also some more imports to North American zoos. At times, the SSP was even larger than the EP. So when I took it over, the EP in 2016, the SSP was larger. Recently, there was quite a decline, but I'm in really good contact with the SSP coordinator. We sent them also 2 females from the EP last autumn. Um, Also because they had one founder in their ancestry line, which was not yet in the SSP population, but on the other hand, also as a demographic boost because there had been quite little breeding in the SSP in the past 7 years, um, and the population is overaging, and there has been almost quite a population crash recently, and therefore they needed some, especially some young females to restart breeding. And in return, after long preparation, there was some delay. Initially, I wanted to acquire this male for Duisburg, but there was some challenges with changed German import regulations. Actually, during a recent update, the Uprary family was apparently not sufficiently addressed in there, and so it was quite difficult to get this done. But I'm quite happy that eventually Chester Zoo took over this male because it also has a founder in its entry line, which is not yet in the EP population. And for the benefit of the genetic diversity in both populations, we try to do these exchanges. And actually, the female you can see in my background, that's Kinja. She was born in Omaha Zoo, and 2 weeks after I had started as a zoological assistant in Duisburg Zoo, almost exactly 10 years ago in July 2015, I took over this female at Frankfurt Airport when she came from the SSP, and she was also part of a transfer back then in the other direction. At that time, two females were shipped from the SSP to the EEP. So this has happened before. There were also earlier, there were animals coming from San Antonio to Duisburg and from other from UK collections in North America. So there's a long history of collaboration between North America and Europe.
That's really, yeah, fantastic that it's been quite not easy in a sense, but quite it's now an established partnership, and yeah, can only continue to be beneficial going forward. So in terms of why we're talking about Fossa here today, and obviously the importance of the role of breeding programs, what are the classifications and population trends for Fossa, and where are those threats coming from?
So they're currently classified as vulnerable according to the IUCN Red List. The assessment is not that recent. I think it's from 2015. And there's a suspected population decline. And this is also confirmed by some data which were collected from the field partners in the Kirindi dry forest area, which is one of the largest remaining habitat patches, and it's also one of the best places to see them in the wild, actually. And there's a number of threats. So obviously, habitat loss is a massive issue. So Madagascar has lost about 85% of its original forest cover already. And besides the direct effect of less habitat, it also increases the fossa-human conflict because obviously less habitat means less prey, and the fossa are looking for alternatives then. And often this is the livestock of people, and therefore, if they are taking chicken, for example, they are also persecuted as a pest. And there's also evidence, there have been some surveys in different parts of Madagascar that they are also directly persecuted for human consumption.
Oh wow, I wasn't aware that they were being consumed by humans, but yeah, I was aware of the kind of the retaliation killings from Foss's taking poultry, and I just wanted to because we're seeing quite a lot of success with bomas for lions in Africa because of similar reasons. Do you think there might be any chance of a similar kind of concept for fossas in Madagascar and kind of that capacity building in the future?
Actually, this has already been done, also by this NGO partner, Chances for Nature, working in the Karindi region. They've developed some fossa-proof chicken dens and then kind of introduced this concept to villages so that they could build these installations on their premises. And obviously, they have to make sure that their chicken, which are normally free roaming, go in there at night. And there's another aspect which is currently, or there's some study in the concept phase, um, that there's a plan for next generation sequencing. So basically, sequencing the feces of the fossa and then determine the prey species, and by that studying if there's some seasonal difference in the consumption of poultry. Because there's the hypothesis that in the dry season, with the poorer availability of natural prey, there's a higher risk of the fossa going for livestock. And if that would be confirmed, then obviously the measures against it could be a bit more targeted. Um, so that's something which is at the moment a bit in a concept phase. There has been some first studies with next generation sequencing, which were also thankfully supported by Manda in Nature, so by Singapore Zoo, which is also a member of the Fossa EP. They are also associate member of EASA, and they have also acquired Fossa through the EP, and they financed this pilot study, and it showed that you can actually determine the prey species of the fossa by this method. Funnily, or one of the 3 species detected in this trial was the boki, so another quite rare euplaid species, even more threatened than the fossa. I also saw them in Kirindi when I was there in autumn 23. But yeah, as I said, fossas take anything. So besides lemurs, they also take their smaller cousins.
So you obviously mentioned kind of the new style of EEP at the beginning is more in line with the one plan approach, and obviously you've got partners out in Madagascar who you've been fortunate enough to go and visit. What are these in situ organisations that zoos are supporting, and how often, or how is it kind of determined how on what level zoos are going to support these organisations?
Um, well, initially, there used to be kind of a obligatory contribution at times when the fossa used to be quite rare. And basically, Duisburg Zoo almost had kind of the monopoly on them. There was a mandatory contribution of $1,000 per year for an animal, and they were always sent out on loan. At some point, when they became more common, this practice had to be discontinued, and it was replaced by some kind of voluntary contribution. Um, and as I said, different projects were supported over the years. There were some sponsorships for field studies on veterinary topics on the ecology, and there's a really nice PhD publication which brought a lot of insight into their social behavior. It even had some effect on the captive management, because besides the mating trees, it was also lined out that young males are also hunting in coalitions. Um, and that's something which is also adapted in the EP, because there's a male bias population. And to deal with that, there's also so-called brother duos, um, which is making it more attractive for holders to keeping them in a non-breeding setup. And over the last, I think the first duos were established something like 2007, 8. So over this long period of time, almost 20 years, we found out that duos of 2 brothers from the same litter can be quite stable over many years. And the benefit for the zoos is that they have the animals constantly together, compared to the breeding pairs, which have to be separated out of breeding season. So there's more interaction, and On the other hand, the EP can deal with this male surplus. Um, it's not quite sure yet if that is a natural bias, which would in a way make sense due to the breeding ecology because of this male competition for females. It could be beneficial for the species to have a male biased birth sex ratio at birth. I mean, even in humans, there's a slightly natural male biased birth rate ratio, but in the fossa it might be a bit more pronounced towards males. On the other hand, the North American population is now quite equal sex-wise, so we're not that sure if it's just some coincidence. We will see over time. Um, and then already, yeah, something like 13, 14 years ago, this NGO Changes for Nature was yeah involved, and a number of projects supported in the Kirundi Medaba region, from environmental education, the establishment of this Fossa-proof chicken dens, then some workshops on the construction of firewood saving cooking stoves, because they are saving 70% of firewood, which is the one of the main causes of deforestation. Obviously, also population monitoring and a reforestation project.
Fantastic. And so, in terms of like conversations, what are there any kind of meetings throughout the calendar year that the Fossa EEP has to determine what the next steps for zoos will be in the conservation efforts?
Um, Well, there's no strict regular cycle for that. There have been some meetings, mostly online, which is easier nowadays. Um, Obviously, it's also always addressed at the regular meetings. I mean, the most regular meetings or most significant ones for EEPs are the mid-year meetings of the respective taxon advisory group. So the Fossa EP falls under the remit of the small carnivore taxon advisory group, and obviously there's also the EASA annual conference, which happens every year in autumn. Last year in autumn we had it in Leipzig. Um, so that's also where both the tech chairs are informed, which are in a way my bosses, so to say, overseeing my work as a coordinator, and this is also a networking effort where you can talk to the other coordinators of other species of a which might have similar needs, and do networking ideas there. In the past, there was the idea to kind of pool the efforts for different species in the Kirundi Medaba region, but we have not yet come to the point to find a framework to that for that, because there's different species occurring there. There's a giant Malagasy jumping rat, there's a buki, there's a fossa. I mean, the lemurs occurring there are not that relevant for in Europe. I mean, some of the species are not kept, like the Sifaka species occurring there, and others are not that threatened, like the red-fronted lemurs. But there are some species which have similar needs, but obviously it's not so easy to kind of creating a framework, even though it might bring more efficiency, which would kind of uh, be working for all these species.
And in terms of maybe our listeners or visitors to zoos that just have a particular attraction to fossa, or they just really enjoy them, is there anything that people who don't work within zoos or conservation can do to help fossas in the wild?
I mean, obviously, they can also support NGOs working with the species or with habitats where they occur in. And fortunately, they're still found in several parts of the island. I saw them in two different parts. one in Andasibe in the eastern rainforest, where I was quite lucky. I got some hint of another conservationist working there, that a fossa mating was observed at our next destination the previous day, and we were at least lucky to still see the female the next day. And in Kirindi, in the north, in Andra Fiamena, which is a dry forest in the northeast, one of our guides saw one at night. I was a few meters too far. I just heard a noise when it was vanishing, but I trust him that he could recognize the species, so it's still around there. Um, but yeah, obviously it is affected by habitat loss, and I mean, some of the other people traveling with me, some colleagues also from other zoos, they came back quite frustrated. I mean, I was prepared that Madagascar is not the paradise and that there's a lot of destruction there. I came back with a rather positive impression that there is still a chance of preserving habitat there. And so the second thing uh, everyone can do helping preserving the habitats is going there and visiting the parks and showing the local people that preserving their unique fauna and flora gives some benefits to them, that it's more efficient to preserve the remaining patches of habitats instead of destroying those unique forests just for charcoal, because you will sell it once and then it's gone. But if you preserve it, then it will be like a long-term capital where your children and your grandchildren can get their income from. And one very good example was this place where the fossa was spotted at night. Andra Fiamena in the northeast. It's the place where the last black sifakas, the Perrier sifakas, are surviving. They were down to about 150 individuals. Now there's again more than 500, because there's hardly been any deforestation in the past about 15 years. There's a local eco lodge, and a whole village is living, getting its income from there. There people are employed there for maintenance, for yeah, doing the rooms, the room service, doing food and so on. And there's kind of a flat rate price of 100 euro per night, which covers everything: accommodation, food, non-alcoholic drinks, the admission fee, so they can plan. They have a fixed income, and you can just go there. You have your tours in the park at day, at night. You can see the animals, and the people they really see that preserving their local wildlife is beneficial and it works. And so my impression was that even though Madagascar is a very poor country, there is a chance that by people still coming there and spending their money there on good projects, there might be a hope that a lot of the remaining unique fauna and flora, they can survive, and maybe at some point they can also the often quite low population numbers can also again be increased for long-term survival.
Yeah, a bit of conservation optimism really does go a long way, and I feel better just hearing you say it, and also putting the point on the importance of sustainable ecotourism, and the value being put on the local wildlife can work wonders. So I think we've really had a good insight into the zoo world and their role within fossa conservation. We're now going to switch track and take a look into your career and background. And I suppose a logical place to start would be your role with the fossa. So, what is your favourite thing about fossa? What drew you to want to work with them in the first place?
Well, I think my first contact with them was in my childhood. My mother is from an area quite close to the Swiss border, so in my childhood we often went to Basel Zoo because her family came from quite close there. And as I mentioned before, they were one of the first zoos to breed them, and I still have some faint memories of them being kept in the old carnivore house. Um, they had to discontinue keeping them after they tore down this old building and redeveloped the area. But I found them fascinating, like many species. Over the years, I saw them in other places. Duisburg, when I first went there, something like, yeah, it's already, yeah, almost 26 years ago, still in my childhood. But actually, my first kind of half a year as a zoological assistant in Duisburg um, uh, was finally making it one of my favorite animals. I went through all the departments of the zoos and also did work there with the keepers. Also with Mike in the carnivore department, and he told me a lot about it. I picked up this beautiful Fossa female in Frankfurt Airport. And this was like these were these experiences, and then yeah, a bit more than half a year later, when I became curator and the EP was vacant, our director asked us who wants to take it over, and I immediately volunteered because I saw the potential and yeah, was fascinated and also their agility. I mean, it's one of the most agile species you can imagine. Uh, I remember talking to a Dutch colleague. They acquired the species quite freshly for their zoo. Initially, they had just a male, and he told me um, he had some time before they got yellow-throated martens, and he always thought this would be the ultimate agile carnivore. And then they got their first fossa and said, "Okay, I was wrong." And yeah, this is really. I mean, also the sounds they make. I mean, they're not very vocal when they are anxious and in the mating season, but it's really unique. There's nothing like that. And yeah, I mean, if you have worked with them and seen them in a bit some more occasions, they're just fascinating.
Yeah, fantastic to hear about some of the kind of stories and experiences that drew you into to working with them and dedicating a lot of your role towards their conservation. So in terms of just getting into zookeeping and conservation in general, was it still those early days visiting Basel Zoo that made you determine where your career was going to go?
Well, when I was a little child, I wanted to become a vet because initially, I mean, we had a cat and sometimes we had to go to the vet, and this was like this ideal person working with animals. And then some years later, I saw documentaries about field biologists and thought about that and had many books and went to zoos and but I think finally my career path or wish was finally determined when I did my first internship at Heidelberg Zoo in southern Germany, so quite close from where I'm originally from. At school, I mean, in Germany, at some point during your school time later on, you there's some kind of a mandatory internship at some company. Some people are going, I don't know, to automotive company, and I went to a zoo. And after that, I was sure, okay, that's where I want to go. And so I did my biology studies, did further internships also here in Leipzig, uh, in the old aquarium at that time, in the animal, as an animal keeper, basically, and yeah, 16 years ago, at Cologne Zoo, at Magdeburg Zoo. Um, and yeah, this eventually brought me where I am at the moment. And I was lucky to get this initial position as a logical assistant at Duisburg Zoo. When I got it, it was initially limited to, I think, 9 or 10 months only. It was kind of a compensation for a sick leave, but eventually things turned out to be lucky for me. I could stay there, was even promoted initially to a curator, and yeah, could take my next steps from there.
And so throughout your time, you've probably experienced and done lots of different things, but would you say there's a particular part of your role that you really enjoy?
Um, I think yeah, it's the population management, also the contact with conservation. activities. I'm also on the advisory board of another German conservation NGO I'm a long-term member of, and I think having the chance to influence things a bit. I'm also a member of several taxon advisory groups, um, and yeah, that's I think um, the most exciting part. And yeah, sometimes it's even down to practical work. I mean, sometimes I'm also doing practical animal keeping. We had some time earlier this year where I could help some of my colleagues here in of the animal care team because they had to do some sophisticated animal training for complex transport, and I stepped in for a few days and did some animal care in the area, which was also nice for me to have
Mm.
this direct contact with the basic work and not only um, yeah, managing things because yeah, that's also essential. And yeah, so I think what makes it really exciting is also that every day is different. Of course, there's also some routine tasks, but I think this job, this profession uh, is so full of challenges, surprises. Every day is different, and this was what's making it also so special.
Yeah, it really is. And I used to ask people, what does a typical day look like? But I really have learned to just remove that question because, like you
Yeah.
say, outside of the routine tasks, it's so fluid, and that is one of the key attributes to working in this field is being able to think on your feet and tackle those challenges with obviously the support of con specifics around you. But yeah, things creep up every day that you just don't necessarily expect are going to come at you. So on that, actually, what would you say has been the most challenging part of your career?
I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, you're always confronted with some setbacks. It can be some unexpected losses of animals, which can happen through an accident or a disease, or you are planning something with an animal, and in the end, everything uh, doesn't turn out in the end, which can be quite frustrating. Obviously, when you're working with people, there's always also issues there, conflicts, staff matters. Um, in the end, there can also be financial constraints. Sometimes you cannot realize all your plans because things are not working out, and in the end, what you are doing also has to be financed.
Mm.
Um, so that's some kind of yeah, some typical issues which you are confronted with. Um, but yeah, I think I couldn't really pick out one particular aspect. But yeah, obviously there have been setbacks and issues. But I think that's life, and I think you will encounter these problems in almost every profession. I mean, yeah, in more or less um, a similar way. So in the end, I think you just have to get your motivation from the positive side and from your achievements, and uh, and by this also get through the hard days.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Certainly, those challenging times when they do happen are still a learning opportunity, and it's how you approach the next situation going forward is really motivating. And so, Johannes, just to finish up with, then, is there any particular work surrounding Fossas or Leipzig Zoo or things that are involved in Fossa conservation that our listeners should take away from today's episode?
Um, well, I think people should. I mean, if you are talking about conservation with um, an average person which you're encountering on the road, many people would probably refer to great apes and tigers and elephants. Um, I think those species. are quite secure because there's so many organizations working with them, so many I mean they also have their challenges, but there's so many species beyond that, and often those don't have a lobby. And I refer to this conservation organization of which I'm in the advisory board, and they are specifically dedicated to those species which are hardly supported by other organizations. And I think that's something, a takeaway message that often the real top priorities in conservation are those lesser known little species. I mean, in my opinion, one of the biggest or the most threatened groups are freshwater fish, because freshwater habitats are under big pressure. I saw it in Madagascar. You could hardly find an intact a river or other freshwater habitat because obviously water attracts people. There's invasive species in there. There's pollution. There's sedimentation from the degradation of the landscapes, and there's so many examples of extinction there, and also that's one of the, I think, most significant backup populations we have in Leipzig here. We have quite a large collection of endangered freshwater species, some of them extinct in the wild, and that's something which is, I think, little known in the broad public, that those small species are probably the ones where zoos can make the biggest difference. Because obviously, if some little river or stream in the peat swamp forest in Sumatra is destroyed, then the fish there is gone. And the Sumatran tigers might still be around in zoos in other reserves on the other side of the island, in different countries. So I think people should always be aware of the huge amount of biodiversity, but also the huge amount of threats, and that especially those little known species from the core biodiversity areas, they are in a very high threat.
Yeah, a great point, and definitely something the podcast tries to emulate. Certainly, I have been in contact with some of the freshwater teleost EEP coordinators, so hopefully we'll also secure some episodes to represent those guys too. But yeah, look out for the lesser known species, because quite often they disappear before they've really even had a chance. So with that, Johannes, a massive shout out to you for gracing the podcast and putting the spotlight on the Fossa and the other little guys, and keeping us enlightened with all of the conservation actions taking place for their survival. We'll be sure to keep up to date with any Fossa developments, the work of Leipzig Zoo and zoos as a collective in supporting their future.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to talk about the Fossa and their background, and looking forward to hear the episode.
Hey there, friends. Sadly, that does bring this episode to an end. I have loved having you on this journey with me, and I hope you've enjoyed listening about the conservation efforts for the Fossa. I'll be sharing some of Johannes's photos of Fossa on the podcast social media throughout the week to keep the conversation going, and perhaps some of my own if I can dig them out of the archive that is my hard drive. However, if you have some photos or videos of Fossa of your own that you wish to share, then you can send them to the podcast's email address with your name listed in the show notes. Also listed in the show notes are links to some of the amazing NGOs and organisations mentioned in this episode if you wish to do a little extra reading. Please rate and subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen, and follow on social media to connect, interact and keep up to date with the podcast's latest developments. I hope to see you all at the next episode. Until then, you have been listening to the Conservationists Assemble,